Hey guys, tonight we're climbing into one of the more quietly transactional decisions a young woman could make in 19th century America, answering a stranger's newspaper advertisement, boarding a train or a ship, and marrying someone she had never once met, in a place she had never once seen, in a life that bore almost no resemblance to the one described in his letter. Not a fairy tale, not a frontier romance novel. The real version, the one with coded classifieds, ghost-written love letters, sod houses so dark you couldn't thread a needle at noon, and the occasional husband who had neglected to mention the previous three. If you're listening right now, thank you, sincerely. Hit like and subscribe only if you actually like this sort of slow, factual, occasionally absurd history. Drop a comment telling me where you are tonight and what your clock says somewhere out there it is 4 inches the morning right now, and tell me, while you're at it, butter making or sewing, because that, apparently, was the resume. Lower your lamps, switch on a fan or a soft white noise track, settle in and tug your blanket close, maybe pin it under your shoulder, just in case your subconscious starts working out the milking schedule for 12 cows. Did you ever wonder what it was like, exactly, to unfold a Sunday paper in 1870 and read a stranger's 3-sentence summary of the rest of your life? How a polished love letter from a Montana rancher read, when the rancher himself could not spell Montana? Could a small photograph the size of a playing card tell you anything true, or only something flattering from 7 autumns ago? Could you survive 6 weeks at sea round Cape Horn only to step off into a mining camp that smelled exclusively of mule and ambition? What was a soddy, precisely, and why did one Norwegian wife in Dakota Territory say her roof was trying to kill her? What happened when the circuit-riding minister never came and the common law arrangement quietly became the whole marriage? And seriously, how many wives was too many wives? And did Nevada have an official number? Congratulations. You've just woken up in a boarding house room in Boston, Massachusetts in the autumn of 1871 with a newspaper folded to page 4 and a decision that cannot be unmade sitting at the bottom of the column, third advertisement from the left. The advertisement is 4 lines long. It has described an entire human future in 40 words. Good luck. You are sitting at the small table by the boarding house window where the light is least bad, with the Sunday edition of the Chicago Tribune folded open to the matrimonial column. You have read 3 pages, and you have not eaten. The advertisements are arranged in small, dense paragraphs, set in a typeface that is small, narrow, and slightly grim, the way obituaries are set, and for similar reasons. Some are numbered, some have names. You are looking for one that does not lie about anything you would notice. Let's talk about what they actually say. A farmer of steady habits, aged 34, owning 160 acres in Kansas, seeks a healthy Protestant woman of good character. That is a complete sentence, and also, in a sense, a complete personality. He has told you his land, his age, his religion, and his assessment of what he requires. He has not mentioned the house. He has not mentioned the weather in Kansas. He has not mentioned that 160 acres of prairie in 1872 contains exactly 0 trees, which is information you will need. The women's advertisements read differently. They lead with skills, strong and accustomed to hard work, experienced in butter making, sewing, and household management, willing to relocate. The word appearance does not appear. The word lonely does not appear either, though it is present in every line. You are reading the 1870s equivalent of a LinkedIn profile, except the job is permanent and the relocation package is a one-way train ticket. A widow named Mrs. Elspeth Crane in the ad below yours has listed her qualifications in descending order of practicality, manages a full kitchen, keeps accurate accounts, in good health. She is 31. She mentions good health twice. She knows something. The Matrimonial News, founded in San Francisco in 1870, is better organized than the Tribune column. It uses coded numbers instead of names. You'll get to that next week. Now, the men's letters. Some of them are very good. Eloquent, warm, specific in the right ways, describing the land in generous light, the house in careful detail, the future with measured optimism. A few of these letters were written by the man himself. The rest were written by a scribe, paid in cash or eggs or whatever was negotiable that week, and bear approximately the same relationship to their supposed author as a menu bears to the meal. The handwriting is better than the man. The vocabulary is considerably better than the man. You won't know this until you arrive. The photograph comes later, once letters have been exchanged. Carte de visite. The photographer touched up the print with a small brush before sending it. The touching up is standard practice. The photograph is also frequently several years old, taken before the subject acquired the beard, or lost the hair, or acquired the particular expression that comes from 3 winters in a Dakota sod house. You are looking at a man as he wished to be remembered at an earlier and more optimistic moment. You fold the paper. You have circled 2 advertisements in pencil. One is in Kansas, one is in Montana Territory, which is a rancher with, he says, 500 head of cattle and a comfortable home. You are a seamstress. You make $5 a week when work is steady, which it is not. The Montana letter will take 3 weeks to arrive if it arrives at all. You sharpen the pencil, you start. You are at the same table the next morning with 2 clean, lined, and slightly cheap sheets of paper, one for the draft and one for the final, and an ink bottle that you have promised yourself you will not knock over. The man in the advertisement is a farmer of steady habits in Kansas, aged 34, and his number is 318. He has asked for a healthy Protestant woman of good character. You are reasonably healthy. You are Protestant by inheritance. The good character part depends on which witnesses are asked. The letter needs to do several things at once. It needs to establish that you are capable of a household, of hard winters, of work that doesn't end when the light does. It needs to establish that you are not desperate, even though you are sitting in a boarding house in Chicago with $4 left from last week's wages and a draft with 3 crossed-out openings. It needs to sound warm but not eager, practical but not cold, interested but not so interested that you've made yourself a problem to be solved. You are writing essentially a cover letter for the rest of your life. The requirements are similar. The consequences are considerably higher. You keep the tone plain. Women who've done this before, and you know 2 from church, one of whom went to Nebraska and one of whom stopped answering letters after a while, they said plain was safer. You write that you are 26, that you can put up preserves, that you've managed a household for your aunt these 3 years since she was widowed. That last part is true. You do not mention that your aunt's household is 2 rooms above a dry goods shop and that the hardest thing you've managed there is a blocked chimney. The letter is not lying. The letter is selecting. He is doing the same thing, of course. Somewhere in Kansas there is a man with number 318 who described himself as a farmer of steady habits. Steady habits is doing a lot of work in that phrase. It could mean reliable and sober. It could mean he has been doing the same failing thing with enormous consistency for years. The advertisement doesn't clarify, neither does his. This is how correspondence works. Both parties build a version of themselves on paper and mail it toward a stranger, and 3 weeks later the stranger writes back with their own version. And somewhere in the distance between the 2 versions is the actual arrangement you are both considering. The photograph comes next. You have 1 carte de visite from your cousin's wedding last spring, slightly out of focus on the left side where the photographer's assistant bumped the table. You are wearing your good dress. You look like someone who owns a good dress, which is accurate, if incomplete. The photograph will travel in an envelope through Illinois, Missouri, and into Kansas, and a man you have never met will hold it in his hands and make a series of decisions about your face. You find this strange to think about. You think about it anyway. Marta Engel, who boards 2 rooms down and came over from Hamburg 8 years ago, leans in the doorway while you're finishing the final copy. She watches you blow the ink dry with that particular expression people wear when they've already done the thing you're doing and it went away they're still sorting out. She doesn't say anything. She adjusts her shawl, looks at the envelope and goes back down the hall. That is its own kind of opinion. You address the envelope to number 318, care of the Matrimonial News, and you blot it twice because you are thorough. The editor will read it before forwarding it. This is both reassuring and slightly mortifying, the idea that somewhere in San Francisco, a man in an office is reading your careful sentences and deciding whether they are appropriate to forward to a stranger in Kansas. It's less romantic than it sounds. It's also less romantic than you'd like. You walk to the post office before you can change your mind. The letter costs 2 cents. The stamp goes on crooked. You don't fix it. The mail slot accepts the envelope without ceremony, which feels correct. Nobody hands you a receipt for this kind of decision. It's in now. Number 318 is somewhere on the other side of several weeks, and what comes back, if anything comes back, will be the next thing you know about him. You are paying 25 cents at the front counter of a small, busy and ink-stained stationer's on Clark Street to mail your reply, and the clerk hands you a small envelope already addressed to the editor of the Matrimonial News, San Francisco edition. The Matrimonial News does not print your name, it prints a number. Your letter goes to the number. The editor opens the envelope, places it inside another envelope, and forwards the second envelope to the man, who does not know where you live and could not find you if he tried. The Matrimonial News was founded in San Francisco in 1870, which is basically Tinder except the swipe takes 3 weeks. The editor reads everything first, and nobody has invented the word swipe. By the 1880s, it has thousands of subscribers and a companion London edition, because loneliness, it turns out, has international distribution. The coded number system is the point. You are number 472. He is number 318. The editor is the middleman, the algorithm, and the bouncer simultaneously. He has opinions about the letters that pass through his hands. He does not share them. The advertisement itself is short. A man's ad runs something like this: farmer, steady habits, 160 acres, Kansas, age 34, Protestant, seeking woman of good character. That is the whole thing. Steady habits is doing a lot of work in that sentence. It is a phrase that could mean he doesn't gamble, or it could mean he has a very fixed idea about how many times a week you should speak. The ad does not clarify. The ad is 6 lines and costs 40 cents to run, and it is the only thing you know about him for the next several weeks, if the letter arrives at all. A letter from Virginia City, Nevada to Boston in 1866 takes roughly 3 weeks. Sometimes it takes longer. Sometimes a stagecoach loses a mail pouch in a river crossing in Wyoming, and the letter does not arrive at all, and nobody sends a notification about the lost letter because that would require another letter. You wait. The waiting is its own kind of work. Marta, across the hall in the boarding house, says she waited 11 weeks once, and then the man had already married someone else by the time the first letter crossed him going the other direction. She says this without visible emotion, the way a person reports a delayed train. Now, women's advertisements are a different construction entirely. You don't describe your eyes or your hair. You describe your output. Strong and accustomed to hard work, experienced in buttermaking and general household management, capable of managing a household without hired help. That last one appears in dozens of ads. It is doing what it appears to be doing. A rancher in 1878 ran an ad specifically requiring a wife who could assist with the milking of 12 cows. 12. He counted them. He put the number in print. The cows are, in this context, the dowry, the job description, and the full disclosure all at once. Some of the men are writing their own advertisements, and some of them are not. A semi-literate rancher in Montana with 300 head of cattle and real property, and no ability to compose a sentence that scans can hire a scribe, a lawyer's clerk, a schoolteacher, a literate neighbour to produce something that reads like a man of substance and feeling. The scribe writes beautifully. He writes of wide skies and honest labour and a man who hopes to share his life with a woman of warmth and good sense. The rancher approves the letter, and the rancher pays the scribe, occasionally in cash and occasionally in other arrangements. The letter is sent. The letter bears no relationship to the man. This is not considered fraud. This is considered making an effort. A painted studio photograph in the carte de visite format arrives in your envelope a few letters later. A good photographer, with good light and a bit of retouching, can make a man of 47 look like a man of 34. He can remove the grey from a beard with a fine brush dipped in ink that photographs as brown. He can arrange the jacket to suggest a shoulder that is no longer quite that shape. The photograph arrives in your envelope looking like evidence. It is evidence. It is evidence of who he was, or possibly who he wished he'd been, or possibly who the photographer felt like making him that afternoon. You study it by the window. The window faces north. The light is adequate. You study it anyway. You are reading the third reply from the Kansas farmer, and his sentences have improved. The first letter was plain, careful, and slightly misspelled in places that suggested he had been taught to read but not encouraged. The second letter used the word felicity. The third letter quotes a line of Tennyson. You hold the paper closer to the lamp. You are not a fool. You have a younger, sharper, and reasonably bribable brother who can write a paragraph for 50 cents and 3 eggs. And you suspect the Kansas farmer has located a similar arrangement. The scribe system runs in both directions. You already know this because your own second letter was tidied considerably by Mrs. Albrecht downstairs, who used to teach school in Ohio before her husband died and left her with a Singer machine and a very small inheritance. She softened your phrasing where you'd been too direct about needing a stable situation, and she added a sentence about your facility with preserving. You paid her in company mostly, and a length of ribbon you weren't using. The letter you sent and the letter you wrote are two different documents. The letter you received and the man who wrote it are probably two different people. This is understood. Nobody says it, but it is understood the way bad weather on the horizon is understood. You see it. You keep walking. What the scribe actually produces is a particular kind of letter. The best ones can fold a man's general intentions into the kind of letter that sounds like a man who reads by the fire after supper and thinks carefully about the world. A rancher in Ellsworth County who owns 160 acres and has not read a book since 1861 can, for the right price, become a man of considerable inner life. The scribe writes in the first person. The scribe writes, "I find myself thinking of the season turning, and a man out here grows tired of a silent table." The rancher reviews the letter by having it read back to him, nods, and mails it. The silence at that table is real, at least. That part checks out. The photographs complicate things further. His carte de visite arrives folded into the fourth letter, slightly soft at the edges from handling. The man in the photograph is square-jawed and appears to be standing very straight, which suggests the photographer asked him to stand very straight. The photograph was almost certainly taken in the nearest town with a studio, which means someone pressed his jacket, which means the jacket exists in the photograph but may not exist in any practical sense on the actual farm. You have done the same arithmetic with your own portrait. You wore your good collar. Mrs. Albrecht pinned the back of your dress tighter so the front would sit properly. The photographer said lovely and you held still, and the result is a version of you that requires specific lighting and one good collar to produce. The photograph is not a lie. It's more like a formal proposal about what you could look like, given favourable conditions. A woman named Cecilia, 3 floors up from you in the same building, received 6 photographs across 6 months of correspondence and selected based almost entirely on the letters, she says, because all 6 men looked approximately the same in the photograph, standing very straight in a pressed jacket, squinting slightly, one hand at the side. She picked the man whose letters mentioned his dog by name. The dog was named Harold. She felt this was a good sign. She is currently in Nebraska. She has not written back yet, which means either the mail is slow or Nebraska is exactly what she feared. You are unwrapping a small square of brown paper at the kitchen table, and the photograph slides out onto the oilcloth between the salt cellar and the lamp. It is a carte de visite, mounted on stiff card the size of a playing card, with the photographer's name printed on the back in small, formal and slightly pompous copperplate. The man in the picture is standing very straight, holding the back of a chair, in a suit that fits him in the way suits fit when borrowed. He looks 28. The letters say he is 34. The picture says nothing. The carte de visite format exists because portrait photography is expensive and a playing card is portable. You can hold it, pass it to your mother, prop it against the sugar bowl and study it over breakfast. The photographer who took this one almost certainly did a few things before he called it finished, softened a jaw, smoothed a brow, removed evidence of whatever the man had been doing to his skin for the last decade in direct sun. Photographers in 1870 offer this the way Instagram offers it now, except instead of a filter, it's a man with a small brush and no particular obligation to accuracy. The suit is doing a lot of work in this photograph. The chair is doing the rest. What the photograph cannot tell you is most of it. It cannot tell you about the sod house, which the letters describe as a modest but well-situated homestead, and which is, in material fact, cut prairie sod stacked like bricks, one window, a dirt floor, and a roof that expresses strong opinions every time it rains, mostly about mud, and where mud would prefer to be. It cannot tell you that the 160 acres exist, but the house on them is 16 by 20 feet, and currently also occupied by his hired man, a man named Dale, who has strong feelings about when supper should happen. The photograph is a portrait of intention. The land is a different document entirely. The letters arrived over 6 weeks, 3 of them, each one written in a hand slightly too elegant for a man who also specified in his matrimonial news advertisement that he needed a wife capable of assisting with the milking of 12 cows. 12. The number is right there in the ad, not buried, not softened. A wife who could assist with the milking of 12 cows and manage a household without hired help. The ad reads like a job posting for a position that has already killed one applicant. You read it twice. You write back anyway. Your mother holds the photograph at arm's length, tips it toward the window. She notes the suit. She notes the chair. She doesn't say what she's thinking, which is that the suit belongs to someone else and the chair is a prop, and the background behind him is painted canvas showing a fern. Your mother has been thinking something quietly for 3 years now, since the war took the neighborhood's supply of men aged 20 to 35 down to a number that can be counted on one hand. She doesn't say it out loud. She hands the photograph back and refills her tea. Margaret, your neighbor's daughter who went to Missouri last spring, sent one letter and then nothing. Cecilia, 3 floors up, chose her man based on a letter that mentioned a dog named Harold and is now in Nebraska, unheard from. The silence of women who have already gone covers a lot of territory. It might mean contentment. It might mean they are too busy with the 12 cows to write. It might mean the mail between Nebraska and here is running on its own schedule, which in 1870 means 3 weeks if it arrives at all and not at all if it doesn't. You turn the photograph over. The photographer's studio is in St. Louis. The man is in Kansas. You don't know when the photograph was taken or what the man looks like now or whether the suit ever fit him properly. The picture says he exists and can stand still for 30 seconds. That's the complete information. You set it against the sugar bowl anyway, where it watches you finish your breakfast with the neutral patience of a job candidate who has done everything right and is waiting to hear back. You are standing in the parlor of the house on Pratt Street, with your hand on the back of your mother's chair, telling her that you have accepted a proposal from a man she has never met who lives in a place she could not point to on the map. She does not put down her careful, slow and deliberate sewing. She does not look up. She finishes the seam she is working on, knots the thread, breaks it with her teeth, and then says the name of the place back to you to make sure she heard it correctly. You repeat the name. She repeats the name. The place is Nebraska, or Kansas, or the Dakota Territory, depending on the letter. Your mother has a general sense of it west of everything she considers organized, and she sits with that sense for a moment while the fire pops and your younger sister pretends to read in the corner. Your mother is not a dramatic woman. She does not weep. She sets her sewing in her lap, smooths it flat with her palm the way she smooths everything that requires managing, and asks how you know him. You explain the matrimonial news. You explain the coded number, the forwarded letters, the 3 months of correspondence. You do not explain the photograph, which is technically of him, though the lighting is generous and the suit was borrowed. Your mother asks if he has steady habits. You say that he says so. She nods slowly, with the expression of a woman storing information she does not yet know what to do with. Your sister is the next conversation. She is 19. She has stopped pretending to read. She is watching you with the exact look of someone who has been doing arithmetic in her head and arrived at a number she doesn't like. She counts your prospects the way your mother counts the household accounts by what's missing. The men who didn't come home from Cold Harbor. The men who came home and weren't the same. The men who went west for gold in 49 and sent letters for 2 years and then stopped. Your sister puts her book down without marking the page. Your mother asks about his land. You say 160 acres, deeded. She asks about the house. You say it's modest. This is true. The letters say modest. The letters do not say dirt floor, 1 window, mud roof. The letters were written, you will realize later, by a man who understood that modest and unfinished are not the same word but function similarly in print. You present the letters now like evidence, which is what they are, and your mother holds the most recent one at the angle of someone reading it for what isn't there. She folds it. She hands it back. She asks if you have prayed about it. You say you have. This is also true. You have prayed about the seamstress work, $4 a week, the smell of the workroom, the light going by 5. You have prayed about the other option, which is to remain in the house on Pratt Street indefinitely, threading needles under a window that faces a brick wall, watching your sister do the same arithmetic every year with the same result. The frontier, in this light, looks less like a gamble and more like a direction. Your mother knows this. She is not a woman who mistakes a limited set of choices for freedom, but she is also not a woman who confuses staying with safety. She grew up in a time when the map had edges. She has watched the edges move. She sits with the letter folded in your hands and says nothing for long enough that the fire needs tending, and your sister gets up to tend it because no one else does. And the room gets quiet the way rooms get quiet when a decision has already been made, and everyone is waiting for the talking to catch up. She asks one more question. She asks if he seems kind. You think about the letters, the careful ones, the scribed ones, 3 months of them, composed by a man who paid someone else to find the right words, which you did not know yet, and would not know for some time. You think about what kind looks like on paper. You say yes. She nods again, the same nod, storing it. She picks her sewing back up. She does not say don't go. She does not say go. She finds the seam she was working on and continues. You are holding an envelope containing one printed, stamped, and slightly creased ticket, emigrant class, New York to San Francisco with a transfer at Omaha, and a folded banknote for $5 that the Kansas farmer has labeled as travel money in case of trouble. The ticket cost him $65, which is several months of a laborer's wages, and you understand that this number is part of the proposal. He has spent money. He expects you to come. The ticket also contains the date you are expected, written in his hand on the envelope, the 14th of October. The handwriting on the envelope is nothing like the handwriting in the letters. The letters were looping and careful, the kind produced by a man who had studied penmanship or paid someone who had. The envelope says October 14th in block letters, slightly uneven, the F in 14th crossed twice as though he wasn't sure the first time. You hold both pieces of paper side by side for a moment, then you put them in the same drawer. The ticket itself is a small printed card. It's a small printed card, approximately the size of your palm, with immigrant class stamped across the top in ink that has bled slightly into the fibers. Emigrant class is the bottom tier of rail travel, which means you will be assigned a bench car with wooden seats, no sleeping berth, and a stove at one end that the men closest to it will control for the duration of the journey. The trip takes approximately 7 days. You will sleep sitting upright, which the railroad does not mention in any of its promotional materials. A neighbor's daughter, Clara Bischoff, made this same journey 2 years prior. She described it to you in a letter that ran to 4 pages and focused heavily on a man in Omaha who stole her bread roll while she was asleep, and on the smell, which she characterized as persistent. She made it sound like an adventure. It probably wasn't. The $5 is harder to interpret. It's generous for a note slipped into an envelope, but it comes with a label, and labels have a way of becoming expectations. In case of trouble means he has imagined the trouble in advance. He has thought about what might go wrong between your front door and his, and he has decided that $5 covers it. $5 in 1870 is roughly a week of seamstress wages, which gives you a precise measure of how much margin he thinks you need. The margin is 1 week. The trouble must not exceed 1 week. You've already given notice at the shop. Missus. Hartley received it with the expression of a woman who has heard this particular reason for leaving before and formed opinions about it. She didn't say anything unkind. She just held the letter a beat too long before setting it on her desk, which communicated everything a spoken sentence would have. Now the packing begins. You own 2 dresses suitable for daily wear, one that could be called Sunday dress if the standards are not too high, and a collection of household items, a good iron, a butter mold your grandmother left you, 3 lengths of cotton she'd bought in anticipation of something unspecified. These go into a trunk. The trunk is heavier than you'd like and lighter than you'd need, which is a fair description of the whole situation. The Transcontinental Railroad finished in May of 1869, which means you are travelling at a moment when the journey is newly possible in a way it simply wasn't for the women who went before you. Before the railroad, women bound for the West went by ship around Cape Horn 6 months, if the weather agreed, or across the Isthmus of Panama, where the yellow fever had opinions about arrival schedules and the cholera had opinions about everything else. The rail journey is 7 days and smells like coal, smoke, and other passengers. It is objectively an improvement. Someone from your church has packed you a paper parcel containing cornbread, 2 hard-boiled eggs, and a folded copy of Psalms. The cornbread is practical. The eggs are thoughtful. The Psalms are the gift of a person who doesn't know what else to say but wants to say something. You close the trunk. You sit down next to it on the floor of your room, which is a thing you have not done since you were small, and you look at the walls for a while. The walls have nothing particular to say. Neither do you. The 14th is in 3 days. You are kneeling on the bedroom floor, sorting your life into 2 piles, and the small pile is the one going with you. The trunk is wooden, banded, and slightly battered, banded with iron, and rated for £60 by the railway, and you have weighed it twice on the kitchen scale by lifting one end and subtracting the floor. Inside go 3 dresses, 1 for arrival and 2 for working, 1 Bible, 2 pairs of stockings, a small mirror wrapped in flannel, a packet of letters, tied with string, which contains every sentence you have so far received from Kansas. The letters are the decision. Not your family's opinion, not the Reverend's mild concern, not the neighbour who asked twice whether you were quite certain. The letters. You've read them enough times that the paper has gone soft at the folds. They describe a farmhouse, a well, 160 acres of good soil, and a man of steady habits who attends church when the circuit rider comes through. The letters are beautifully written, composed with a kind of quiet confidence that makes him sound like a man who reads books in the evenings. He does not read books in the evenings. He paid a school teacher in Salina $3 and a smoked ham to write them. You do not know this yet. The carte de visite sits on the dresser, propped against the lamp. The photograph shows a man in his mid-30s, square-jawed, hat in hand, looking directly into the camera with an expression that says either honesty or extreme discomfort with photography. It's very difficult to tell. The photographer has done him some kindness with the light. The photograph is 7 years old. You are not in a position to know that either. Your mother stands in the doorway watching you fold. She doesn't say anything for a long time, which is its own kind of sentence. Then she hands you a small jar of rendered lard for your hands, because she is practical in the way that grief makes people practical, and she leaves before you can see her face. Let's talk about what fits in £60. 3 dresses is correct, 1 for the journey, which will be ruined by the journey, and 2 for a working life that has not yet revealed its specific requirements. You pack a second pair of boots and immediately unpack them, because the boots alone are £9, and £9 is a Bible, 2 dresses, and room for the small tin of sewing needles your aunt pressed into your hand this morning with the seriousness of someone passing state secrets. The needles stay. The boots stay too, in the end, because you find the Bible already weighs less than you thought and the trunk has opinions about remaining under 60 but can be reasoned with. A woman named Clara Marsh, packing a trunk in Albany in 1873 for a similar journey to Colorado Territory, left a list in her diary. 4 dresses, 1 pair of India rubber overshoes, thread, needles, thimble, 2 books, a tintype of her mother, dried herbs wrapped in brown paper, and a small pistol her brother gave her, loaded, which she describes only as useful in case of snakes. She does not specify which kind. The trunk weighed £58. She notes this with satisfaction. The $5 note goes into the inner pocket of your travelling coat, sewn flat, which is the only financial advice anyone has given you that you intend to follow. Your sister says put it in your shoe. Your mother says put it in your Bible, which is where your grandmother kept money and where it was found 3 weeks after she died, untouched, which was either very secure or very sad depending on how you look at it. The coat pocket wins. The coat pocket is practical and accessible, and the coat will be on your body for the next 8 days. 8 days. New York to Kansas by train, emigrant class with 1 change at Chicago and another at St. Louis, sharing a bench seat that converts to a sleeping berth with a canvas curtain for privacy, which is what railroads in 1876 call privacy. The man on your left will almost certainly snore. The food cart comes through twice a day with hard biscuits and something that used to be beef. You will arrive at the station in Salina, Kansas, slightly grey with travel and wearing your arrival dress, which has held up reasonably well, and there will be a man standing on the platform. You close the trunk. The latch clicks. It's a very final sound for something so small. You are spending your last full day at the boarding house paying the small debts you owe to the small number of people who would notice. 60 cents to Mrs. Healy for last week's room. A dime to the laundress for the collar she boiled twice. $1.25 to the seamstress on the second floor, who advanced you a length of brown, coarse, and faintly itchy wool when your skirt tore in September. Each of these conversations involves explaining where you are going, which you have not yet practiced enough to say without rephrasing it halfway through. Mrs. Healy asks if you've met him. You say that you've exchanged letters. She nods the nod of a woman who has opinions she has decided, charitably, not to share. She counts your coins with one hand and doesn't ask a follow-up question. This is either respect or pity. You collect your receipt and don't investigate which. The laundress, whose name is Bridget, sets down a flat iron and listens with her full body. She wants to know if Kansas is near California. You tell her it is not. She says she has a cousin somewhere in that direction. Then she resumes ironing, pressing a stranger's shirt with a focus that suggests the conversation has concluded. The iron doesn't comment, it just hisses. By mid-afternoon, you've paid everyone and you have $1.40 remaining, plus the 5 sewn into your coat lining, which you are not counting in the normal way. The trunk is locked. The ticket is folded inside your left boot, which is its own small statement about trust. You sit on the edge of the bed and look at the room, the crack in the plaster shaped like a river on no map, the window that sticks unless you hit it precisely left of center, the smell of boiled cabbage traveling upward from the kitchen with the reliability of a clock. You have lived in this room for 2 years and 4 months. It costs $1.70 a week with meals. In Salina, Kansas, the man's last letter described a house, 2 rooms, solid framing, a well that doesn't go dry. The letter was drafted by someone with a better vocabulary than the man who signed it. You know this because his first 2 letters had no commas and his third had 17. Somewhere between November and February he acquired a scribe. You didn't mention it. He didn't either. The photograph you sent him is 7 years old. You are 26 in it, and you are wearing your cousin Margaret's collar. You look, in the photograph, like a woman who has never once spent a winter heating a flat iron on a grate. The photographer touched the negative lightly around the jaw. Not dishonestly, hopefully. It's a small rectangle of optimism, which is exactly what his photograph is too. A man standing beside a fence post, squinting slightly, looking steady. The fence post is load-bearing in the composition. You've studied it. Clara Whitmore from the room at the end of the hall knocks and stands in the doorway holding a cloth-wrapped piece of shortbread. She hands it over with the gravity of someone presenting evidence. She says she hopes he turns out to be what he says. You say you hope so too. There is a pause in which both of you contemplate the substantial gap between hope and likelihood, and then she says she'll write if she ever has news, and you say the same, and the conversation folds closed like a letter that's been read enough times the crease holds itself. The cabbage smell rises again, the window sticks. The crack in the plaster goes on being shaped like a river. You eat supper at the common table and nobody makes a toast because that's not what this table does. You go to bed before 8 and lie awake until well past 10, listening to the building settle into its nighttime complaints, the groan of the third stair, the radiator's quarterly clanking, someone on the street below arguing with someone about something that resolves before you identify a winner. The trunk sits by the door. The boot with the ticket is under the bed. You have done, today, all the things there are to do. Tomorrow there is only the train. You are climbing into the third coach back from the locomotive at the foot of 42nd Street, with your ticket pinned to the inside of your jacket where a pickpocket would have to commit. Emigrant class is a long wooden car with slatted benches running parallel to the windows, sawdust on the floor, and a stove at one end that produces less heat than smoke. You are not alone. The car holds about 50 other passengers, 12 of whom are women, 3 of whom are women travelling without husbands, 1 of whom is you. The bench is not padded. This is not an oversight. The bench is a design philosophy, and the philosophy is you are going somewhere, not being somewhere, and those are different products at different price points. You have a window seat, which means you can watch Manhattan disappear, and then New Jersey appear, and then New Jersey continue for what feels like an unreasonable amount of time. The stove isn't really a stove. It's a small, square and opinionated metal box with ambitions. A man in a brown coat, the conductor, or possibly someone performing the role of conductor without official sanction, feeds it coal at intervals that suggest he has somewhere else to be. The smoke has a direction. The direction is inward. A woman 2 benches ahead, Mrs. Greer, who introduced herself approximately 3 minutes after the train left the station and hasn't stopped since, fans herself with a folded newspaper and calls it bracing. She means it. The food situation resolves itself at the first stop. A platform vendor in Pennsylvania sells hard rolls, cheese of uncertain vintage, and coffee that has been waiting for you specifically since Tuesday. You buy 2 rolls. The cheese watches you from across the counter. You leave without it. By nightfall, you understand the bench problem in full. The slatted wood has memorized the precise location of every bone you own and has opinions about each one. Around you, people arrange themselves into sleeping positions that represent their individual theories about the human spine. A man near the stove achieves something that looks like unconsciousness. His neighbor, a boy of about 14 who has been eating crackers continuously since Albany, does not sleep. He eats crackers through Ohio. A woman named Dorothea Hess slides into the empty half of your bench somewhere around Pittsburgh with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this before. She's going to street. Louis, she says, where her sister has a dry goods store and a spare room and a husband who doesn't gamble more than twice a week, which Dorothea delivers as a selling point. She arranges her bag under her feet, produces a wool blanket from somewhere inside her coat like a small miracle, and tucks it around both of you without asking. The blanket smells like cedar and someone else's kitchen. You don't move away from it. The country changes while you sleep in pieces. You wake up to Ohio being flat in a way that Manhattan was not flat. You wake up again to Indiana being flatter. By the time Illinois arrives, the flatness has become a kind of aggressive statement, like the land has made a decision and committed. A farmer in the seat ahead stares out at it with the satisfied expression of a man who finds this encouraging. You find it clarifying. Whatever you were picturing when you read the words Kansas and open land, the picture is updating itself in real time. Dorothea Hess gets off at St. Louis with her blanket and a cheerful wave. She has given you half a biscuit, the name of a reputable hotel in Chicago if you need to stop over, and the unsolicited opinion that a man who writes a good letter is not necessarily a man who is good. She says it the way you'd say the sky is blue, flat, factual, already gone. The stove has given up entirely by Missouri. You are wearing your second heaviest coat over your heaviest coat. The sawdust on the floor has migrated. The cracker boy has finally finished the crackers and is now asleep across his father with the boneless confidence of someone with no outstanding correspondence pinned inside his jacket. Outside, the dark is the kind of dark that cities don't produce total, unbroken, not even trying. You press your forehead against the cold glass and watch nothing go past at considerable speed. You have been on this train for approximately 30 hours. You have, by the railroad's official reckoning, covered about half the distance. You are 6 hours into the second day when a man 2 rows ahead of you turns around, leans his elbow on the back of his seat, and asks where you are going. You answer Kansas. He asks who is meeting you in Kansas. You answer your husband. He asks how long you have been married. The question has a tone. You give the answer that you have practiced, which involves a name, a year, and a confidence that is mostly performance. He nods slowly, turns back around, and does not speak to you again until Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is where it happens again, except worse, because at Pittsburgh you are momentarily alone. Dorothea has stepped onto the platform to buy something hot, and a man in a wool coat takes the empty space beside you without asking, and introduces himself as a land agent from Cincinnati who travels this line frequently. He says frequently the way some people say inevitable. He has a watch he keeps consulting, as though the watch is a character witness on his behalf. You are not the only woman navigating this. A conductor on the Western lines, if asked, would tell you that unaccompanied women in emigrant class were the single most reliable source of incident reports on any given run. The advice from every women's travel pamphlet of the 1870s is some version of the same instruction. Wear a ring, invent a husband, give him a name, give him an occupation, make him large. You have already done all of this. The ring is borrowed. The husband is real but not yet met. The gap between those two facts is about 900 miles wide. The land agent from Cincinnati eventually moves on, which is a phrase that contains multitudes. You slide your bag to occupy the space he vacated and arrange your coat over it like a small, threadbare, and territorial claim. The coat holds the seat for 4 hours. Dorothea, returning with 2 tin cups of something described as coffee, looks at the coat, looks at you, and says nothing. She doesn't need to. The arithmetic of the journey starts pressing on you somewhere outside Columbus. You can't afford a sleeper car. The sleeper costs $12 above the emigrant fare, which represents approximately 3 months of what you were earning back in New York, stitching collars at 42 cents per dozen. You could sit upright for a week, or you could arrive in Kansas with nothing. You have chosen arriving in Kansas with nothing, and in retrospect this feels like the correct call, but it is now day 2 and your neck has formed opinions about it. The women who could afford second class or a Pullman berth had an easier time, not safe easier. A curtained berth at least placed a physical barrier between you and the Cincinnati land agents of the world. The Pullman porter, a job held almost exclusively by black men after the Civil War, was in practice the most reliable protector of solo female passengers on Western routes. His name, in this car, is Thomas. He has already walked past your row 4 times in 2 hours, not pausing, not looking directly at you, just present. You understand the system without being told. Of course, the railroad marketed Western travel differently. The promotional lithographs showed gleaming observation cars, mountain vistas, women in clean day dresses gazing at scenery with expressions of serene anticipation. They did not show the emigrant-class stove choking everyone in the last 3 rows with coal smoke, or the family directly across from you whose youngest child has been coughing since Ohio with the specific persistence of something that isn't getting better. They also did not show the land agent from Cincinnati. The lithographs never show him, but he is on every train. By the time you cross into Missouri, the light is going flat and grey, and the landscape has opened up into something that no longer looks like anywhere you have been before. The trees thin, then they thin further. Then they stop making a serious effort. The man 2 rows ahead has not turned around again. Thomas has checked the stove. Dorothea is asleep against her bag, her mouth slightly open, completely indifferent to the dignity of the situation. You envy her that. The ring on your finger is slightly too large and keeps rotating so the setting faces down, and you keep turning it back. And somewhere outside Joplin you fall asleep mid-turn and dream of nothing in particular. You are also carrying, in the inner pocket of your jacket, a letter you wrote to your mother from Chicago and have not yet mailed, because the postmaster in Chicago told you that a letter from Chicago to Baltimore moves in 2 days, while a letter from Virginia City, Nevada to Boston might take 3 weeks if it arrived at all. The information has rearranged something in your head. The letters you will write from Kansas to the people you are leaving will reach them in their own time, on a schedule the post office does not guarantee. The implication takes a minute to land. You are traveling faster than your own words. By the time your mother reads that you have arrived safely, you will have been there long enough to have opinions about it. By the time she reads that you are unhappy or happy or somewhere in between, the situation will have resolved itself one way or another, without her input. The post is not a conversation. It's a very slow announcement, delivered to someone who can no longer do anything about it. There was a scribe. You didn't know this until the 3rd letter, when a word appeared melancholy that seemed unlikely given everything else you knew about the situation. You still don't know for certain. The handwriting is consistent. The sentiments are warm. The spelling of February is correct every single time, which, on reflection, is itself a kind of tell. You have met very few men on the frontier so far who spell February correctly on the first attempt. The scribe, whoever he is, has done his job with professional thoroughness. He was probably paid in something practical, not cash. The photograph is in the same pocket. You are carrying his, alongside the unmailed letter, the carte de visite with edges worn from handling. He is seated. He looks directly at the camera with the expression of a man who has been told to look natural and is doing the opposite. His jacket fits. His beard is trimmed. The photographer has done something to the shadows that makes him look, if not prosperous exactly, then at least not desperate. You have looked at it enough times that you've stopped seeing it. Your photograph went east under similar conditions. You sat for it 2 years ago, before the worst winter, before you lost the weight, before the particular tiredness settled around your eyes. The woman in that photograph is you in the way that a town on a map is a town technically accurate. Not quite the whole story. Margaret, who was on the train as far as Steent. Louis told you she'd sent a photograph taken when she was 19. She is 26 now. She said it with the flat delivery of someone reporting a weather condition. She straightened her cuffs and watched Missouri go past the window. You didn't ask what he'd sent her, because you recognized the conversation you were not having. The letter you haven't mailed to your mother sits in your pocket and waits. It says you are well. It says the train is comfortable enough. It does not say you are frightened, because she would worry, and the worry would arrive 3 weeks after the fear has either proven justified or not. The post has its own mercy in that. What it doesn't have is speed. You are standing on the wooden platform at Abilene with your trunk at your feet and the train pulling out behind you, scanning the small, restless, and slightly damp crowd of men in coats for the one who is supposed to know you. He has the photograph. You have the photograph of him. You also have the description he gave in his last letter: dark beard, blue coat, 6 feet. The platform is full of dark beards and blue coats. You are doing arithmetic against the picture in your hand. A man at the far end of the platform takes off his hat. The photograph, you suspect now, was taken at least 8 years before that letter was written by a photographer who had opinions about cheekbones. The man walking toward you has a dark beard. He's wearing a blue coat. The arithmetic is not resolving neatly. The moment itself isn't romantic. It's practical. He is shorter than 6 feet by a margin you are already quietly cataloguing. He is also older than 34, or 34 has been considerably harder on him than on most men. He smiles. The smile is real enough. He says your name says it out loud on the platform, in front of a feed merchant and a boy sitting on a barrel, and you understand that the question of whether this is the right man has just become considerably less important than the fact that he is a man who knows your name at a train depot in Kansas, and the train is already gone. His handshake is firm. This is the first physical fact you actually have about him. Everything else, the 160 acres, the steady habits, the Protestant character arrived through paper and a stranger's handwriting, his handshake is firm. You file that away. Someone will help with your trunk. The someone is a boy of about 14 who turns out to be his nephew, or possibly his hired man's son. The relationship is explained once, and you miss it because you are looking at the wagon. The wagon is real. The horse is real. The horse has a sore on its left foreleg that the horse is choosing to ignore with some dignity. The drive to the property will take 3 hours, he says. You nod. 3 hours ago you were still on a train that had been moving for 6 days. Your sense of distance has been thoroughly retired. A woman named Dora Albrecht, who came through Abilene in 1879 and wrote a letter about it to her sister in Cincinnati, described the drive as the longest silence of her life. Not uncomfortable, she was specific about that, just long and full of sky and the occasional meadowlark doing its absolute best. Her husband of 40 minutes kept his eyes on the road and offered her a biscuit wrapped in cloth around the second hour. She ate it. She wrote that it was the best biscuit she had ever had in her life, which probably says more about the previous 6 days than about the biscuit. The land, if you haven't seen the Great Plains before, does something to the eye that the eye isn't prepared for. You've been looking at buildings your whole life, buildings and fences and other people's laundry, and the plains simply removes all of that and hands you back the horizon, unobstructed, in every direction, like someone has rolled out a tablecloth with nothing on it and asked you to find it impressive. Some women found it sublime. Some women found it terrifying. Most women found it both, at the same time, for the rest of their lives. He points at something in the distance. You can't tell what it is yet. It's flat and low and the same colour as the ground around it, which is the colour of the ground. It gets larger slowly, the way things on the plains do not approaching so much as gradually admitting it exists. It has one window. It is made, you now understand, of the earth itself, cut into bricks and stacked. The roof is grass, real grass, growing. A chicken is standing on it. This is the house. You are inside a one-room county building, 2 streets from the depot, in front of a justice of the peace named Boggs, who has agreed to perform the ceremony that afternoon because the next circuit riding minister is not expected for 6 weeks. The ceremony begins as soon as he locates the book. He reads 4 sentences. He asks 2 questions. You answer both. The Kansas farmer answers both. Boggs writes your name in a ledger, blots it, charges $1.50, and tells you to mind the step on the way out. The whole thing takes less time than it took to iron your travelling dress this morning. You've been in the territory for 4 hours. The ledger itself isn't a marriage certificate. It's a column entry between a livestock brand transfer and a property dispute involving a fence. Your new surname sits there in Boggs's cramped, careful and slightly inky handwriting, surrounded by cattle and litigation, which is more honest about frontier marriage than most wedding sermons manage to be. Boggs doesn't offer congratulations. He has a hat on a hook by the door, and he retrieves it before you've reached the threshold. The Kansas farmer, your husband, technically now holds the door. This is the most courtly thing he will do today. You will remember it specifically because it is followed, 20 minutes later, by him asking whether you've done much churning. Other couples don't even get Boggs. The Halversons, 7 miles east, have been living as married for 18 months, waiting for the circuit minister to come back through. Mrs. Halvorsen has 4 children with the surname her husband uses on his deed. The law knows she's there. It hasn't written down what happens to her if he dies first. She doesn't talk about it. There's nothing to be done about it either way. A woman named Harriet Colby, married in a similar ceremony in 1874 outside Dodge City, wrote in a letter to her sister that the justice performing her wedding sneezed twice during the vows and apologized once. She described the experience as businesslike. She also noted, without apparent irony, that the ceremony was more comfortable than the 3 days she'd just spent on the wagon seat, so it compared favorably. The photographer in Boston took your picture in a studio with a painted backdrop and good light. The carte de visite he produced made you look composed and softly hopeful. The farmer sent you a photograph taken outside, squinting into afternoon sun, his hat pulled low. Neither image is a lie, exactly. Neither is what's standing in Boggs's office with a blotted ledger entry and a step to mind on the way out. Now the two of you are outside on the street. The wagon is where he left it. The horse has opinions about the weight and expresses them. Your husband climbs up without ceremony. You climb up after him and settle onto the bench, which has no cushion because it never did, and the afternoon is already going orange at the edges, and there are still 12 miles between here and the property. You don't feel married. You feel administratively processed. Boggs is locking the door behind you. You are riding a buckboard wagon for the last 8 miles of the journey, and the husband you have known for 90 minutes is driving, and the conversation has run out twice already. The land is flat, brown, and stubbornly continuous in every direction at once. He points ahead with the handle of the whip and tells you that the house is just over the rise. The rise takes another 20 minutes to reach. When you reach it, you see the house. It is the right shape, which is the only kind thing it is. What he said in his letters is worth a second look. He said house. He said homestead. He used the word comfortable once, in the third letter, in a sentence about the fireplace. The scribe he hired clearly had strong feelings about that word, because the fireplace turns out to be a hole cut into the sod wall with a tin chimney pipe that lists slightly east, like it's made a decision and committed to it. The house is sod. Of course it's sod. It's cut prairie grass stacked like bricks, roughly 16 feet by 20, with a dirt floor that has been swept recently enough that you notice it and feel grateful, which is already more gratitude than you expected to feel today. The roof is also sod. This is information that will become relevant the next time it rains, when the ceiling will slowly share its opinion of precipitation by expressing it directly onto the bed. A man named Harlan, the husband's brother, which was not mentioned in any letter, steps out from around the side of the structure and nods at you in a way that means he knew you were coming but was not asked whether that was all right. He has been sleeping in the corner. There's a curtain now. He holds it up briefly, demonstrating the curtain, then lets it fall and walks back outside. The curtain has a small bird embroidered on it. You will come to understand that the bird was put there by the last woman, and that there was a last woman, and that she left, and that nobody is going to tell you more than that without being directly asked. The one window faces north. This is not ideal. In the afternoon, the inside of the house is the colour of the inside of a boot. A Norwegian woman 2 counties over wrote in her diary that her house was so dark at noon she could barely thread a needle. You don't have that problem yet. You haven't tried to thread a needle yet. You will try tomorrow morning and you will understand immediately what she meant and why she wrote it down. The husband carries your trunk inside and sets it against the wall. It takes up a significant fraction of the available floor space. He looks at it, then at you, then at the room, doing a kind of silent arithmetic that neither of you is going to speak aloud. He tells you supper is usually salt pork and cornbread and asks if that's all right. You say it is. This is the first negotiation of your marriage. You have both passed. There is no pump. Water comes from a hand-dug well 30 feet back from the structure, which has a wooden cover to keep out debris, placed there with real optimism by someone who has not yet met the local wildlife. A bucket hangs from a rope. The bucket has a crack along the bottom seam that you will discover on your first trip, which is this evening, because there is nothing in the house to drink. The bucket loses about 1/3 of its contents on the walk back. This is also information. You adjust your grip and go again. Outside, the prairie stretches in every direction with the same flat insistence it had when you arrived. There's no fence line on the north side yet. There is a sound that might be whined through the grass, or might be something in the grass, and the distinction matters and you're not sure you know it yet. The husband calls from inside. "Supper," he says. You go in. The curtain with the small embroidered bird falls closed behind you. You are inside the house for the first time, standing in the middle of a room that is 16 feet by 20, with one window, one stove, one bed, and a dirt floor that has been swept recently in your honour. The walls are made of cut blocks of prairie sod stacked like bricks and reinforced where the corners settled. The ceiling is low enough that your husband stoops, and he is not a tall man. There is no second room. The pile of blankets in the corner belongs to the hired man, who you will meet at supper. The window faces north, which means it receives approximately no sun at any hour of any day. In winter, this is a problem. In summer, this is also a problem, because the angle means the room sits in its own particular dark from roughly 10 in the morning onward, the kind of dark that isn't quite dark enough to require a candle but is too dark to do anything requiring precision. A Norwegian woman 2 counties east in the 1880s wrote in a letter home that she could not thread a needle at noon. She thought it was her eyes. It wasn't her eyes. The roof isn't really a roof. It's a quiet, structural and ongoing suggestion. A layer of prairie grass and packed earth laid over a timber frame, which holds reliably until it rains, at which point it becomes a slow-moving soil event happening directly above your head. The dripping starts approximately 20 minutes after rain begins and continues for roughly 6 hours after rain ends. You learn to move the flour sack. You learn to move it before you hear the first drip, because by the time you hear the drip, the flour sack is already a casualty. There's a specific domestic skill in prepositioning containers, and you'll have it by December. The stove is a small cast iron affair, stubborn and imperious, the kind of appliance that has developed strong opinions about when it will perform. Fuel on the treeless Great Plains is dried buffalo chips or cattle chips, collected by hand and stacked against the exterior wall. They burn fast and low. Getting a stove to baking temperature requires roughly 3 times as much fuel as a wood fire, and about twice as much patience as you arrived with. The stove doesn't apologize. The stove has never apologized for anything. Meanwhile, there are the other residents. The hired man's name is Carl. He appears at supper carrying a hat, which he holds in front of him like a small shield. He is neither friendly nor unfriendly. He is simply present, eating salt pork and cornbread with the focused efficiency of a man who has made peace with all ambient awkwardness. This is his 4th winter in the soddy. He has what you might describe as an institutional familiarity with the space. He knows which floorboard shifts, where the cold comes in, which corner of the stove runs hot. You have been here 4 hours. He has been here 4 years. The hierarchy of competence is clear, and neither of you mentions it. The smell of the sod house is its own category of experience. Damp earth, dried grass, rendered fat from the cooking, and something underneath all of it that you can't name but that the mice probably can. The mice are present. Not many, not few. Just a standing population, going about their evening in the walls with the focused industry of creatures who do not care that you have arrived and have not updated their plans to reflect this. By spring, you'll have a cat. The cat will be named something practical like Cat, because the frontier has neither the time nor the temperament for whimsy. You're setting 3 plates instead of 2 for the first supper, because the hired man lives here. His name is Wilkins. He is 26. He sleeps in the corner on the pile of blankets you noticed earlier. He does not eat in the bunkhouse because there is no bunkhouse. The arrangement was not mentioned in any of the letters, and you understand by the slight stoop of your husband's shoulders when he names it that he understands it should have been. Wilkins does not look up from his plate for the entire meal. The food is cornbread, salt pork, and dried beans. This is also tomorrow's food. It is also the food from the week before you arrived, and it will be the food until something changes, which it won't for a while. Your husband eats quickly and without comment, the way a man eats who has not had anyone watching him eat in a long time. You eat slowly because you are not sure you are hungry and because you are looking at the room. The room takes about 4 seconds to look at. Then you look at it again. The corner where Wilkins sleeps isn't really a corner. It's the far end of the same room. There is no wall between his blankets and your side of the bed, the actual bed, which is a frame with a rope lattice and a cornhusk mattress that has developed opinions about your weight distribution. A flour sack hangs from a nail on a ceiling beam as a kind of curtain. The flour sack covers roughly 1/3 of the distance it would need to cover to mean anything. Wilkins has added nothing to his corner. No personal effects, no indication that a human being lives there aside from the blankets themselves. He has the energy of a man who has learned not to get attached to corners. The letters described a working ranch, 200 acres, solid stock, a house with proper walls. Nothing in those letters was false. Exactly. The house does have walls. They're sod, and one of them has a mouse running behind it right now. You can hear the scratching, but they are walls in the structural sense of the word. The ranch does run cattle. Fewer cattle than the letters implied, but the letters never named a number, and you realize now that this was deliberate, in the way that a lot of careful word choices were deliberate. The scribe your husband hired was good, you have to give him that. After supper, Wilkins washes his own plate at the basin, sets it back on the shelf with the practiced economy of someone who has done this 10,000 times, and returns to his corner without a word. He is asleep or performing sleep within a few minutes. Your husband looks at the flour sack. You look at the flour sack. The flour sack does not solve the problem it has been assigned. You do a quiet, careful, and sleep-deprived accounting of what the day has produced. You have travelled approximately 2,000 miles. You have been married for 11 hours. You share a room with a 26-year-old named Wilkins. The cornhusk mattress shifts whenever you breathe. Outside, the wind moves across the grass with a sound like the whole prairie is exhaling slowly, not because it is peaceful, but because it is enormous and you are very small inside it. The candle burns down to a nub. Your husband says goodnight in the tone of a man who is also filing it away as a question. You say goodnight back. Wilkins does not say goodnight. The flour sack hangs. The mice are active. Tomorrow there are 12 cows to be milked before breakfast, which is cornbread. You are walking to the well at 6 in the morning with 2 heavy, dented, and uneven pails on a yoke that the previous wife there was a previous wife. You have not yet been told about her left behind the door. The well is 40 feet deep, dug by hand by your husband and Wilkins in the spring of the 2nd year, and the rope is stiff with cold. You crank the windlass twice. The bucket comes up wet on the outside, full on the inside, and slightly cloudy. You pour it into your pail. You crank again. The cloudiness is sediment. Probably. The well sits 30 feet from the livestock pen, which is either fine or it isn't, and you won't know which until someone gets typhoid. The neighbours, the word is generous. Their 5 miles east lost a child last summer to water that looked identical to yours. You carry your 2 pails back to the house. The yoke bites into your shoulders where it was fitted for someone slightly shorter. Laundry day, as it happens, is today. It also happened to be today last week, and the week before, because the work does not observe your schedule. You heat water in the iron kettle, feed the fire with dried cattle chips. The treeless plains have opinions about firewood, and those opinions are final, and you work a block of lye soap made from rendered fat and wood ash against the fabric until your knuckles go raw. The soap is not gentle. The soap has never aspired to be gentle. It exists in a purely adversarial relationship with both dirt and skin, and it does not distinguish between them. 3 hours. That's laundry. You hang the shirts on the line your husband strung between 2 fence posts, and by noon the wind has deposited a thin layer of alkaline dust on everything you washed. The prairie gives, and the prairie takes back. A woman named Dorothea Voss, who came out from Cincinnati 2 years before you, keeps a diary that you will never read. She writes in it every Sunday with the careful handwriting of someone who once had more time. Her entry from February reads, "Heated water 4 times. The 3rd bucket froze before I could use it. My hands are cracked at every knuckle. I do not write this to complain. I write it so someone will know. The diary has 43 pages left. She's rationing them. The water you drink by afternoon tastes faintly of iron and rope. You boil what you can. You don't always boil what you can, because boiling requires fuel, and fuel requires a trip to the barn with a bucket, and everything out here requires something else first, in a chain that began before you arrived, and will continue after you're gone. The previous wife understood this. You are beginning to. Of course you knew the work would be hard. The advertisement said times accustomed to industry times, and you wrote back that you were, which was true in the way that knowing how to swim is true before someone drops you in the ocean. The polished letters described cattle and acreage. They did not describe the yoke. They did not describe the rope, stiff with cold, or the cloudy water, or the soap that treats your hands like a problem to be solved. The scribe your husband hired wrote beautiful sentences. The scribe had never carried 2 full pails a quarter mile before breakfast. You set the pails inside the door. You wipe your hands on your apron. 12 cows are waiting, and they have been waiting since before you got up, and they will still be waiting after you carry the milk inside and start the bread, which needs to rise before dinner, which requires more water, which means another trip to the well. The yoke is still cold. You leave it by the door where the previous wife left it. You are heating water on the stove for the laundry, and it takes most of the morning to bring enough of it to a boil to begin. Lye soap is in the small, chipped and slightly cracked crock on the shelf, made in the fall from wood ash and the fat of the last hog, and it removes both stains and skin. You scrub on a board in a tub set on 2 crates. The water goes from clear to grey to brown. You change it 3 times. By 2 in the afternoon, the wash is on the line, and you sit down on the step. The soap has opinions. It doesn't discriminate between the mud on your husband's work shirt and the top layer of your knuckles. Both go. You learn to hold the fabric at an angle that keeps your palms out of the worst of it, and you develop this technique around the 3rd week, which is about 2 weeks too late. Your hands look like something that has been through a geological event. The fuel is the next problem. On the treeless Great Plains, there is no wood to speak of, which means the fire under the washwater burns on dried cattle chips, collected from the pasture the previous afternoon in a bucket that also does other things. You don't dwell on this. The cattle chips burn adequately. They smell like what they are. The water boils regardless, and the laundry gets done, and this is the outcome that matters. The stove has no feelings about its inputs. The shirts take longest. Your husband owns 3. 1 is on his back, 1 is drying on the line, and 1 is in the tub in front of you, which means the entire system depends on the weather holding. It doesn't always hold. A cloud comes in around noon and you stand at the window watching it with the focused attention of someone whose entire afternoon is on the line. Literally. The sheet makes a snapping sound in the wind like it's trying to leave. Marta Henriksen, Norwegian, Dakota Territory, 2 winters in keeps a note tacked above her washboard. It says Tuesday. Not because she forgets the day, because she needs it confirmed. Laundry is Tuesday. Tuesday is laundry. The note is doing structural work. By 2 o'clock, your back has made its position clear. You sit on the step, not because you are resting, but because the alternative is the floor, and the floor is dirt, and you have just spent 6 hours fighting dirt, and there is a principle involved. The sun is moving west. The shirts are drying. The tub is tipped against the house, so the grey water runs toward the garden, which is thirsty, which is always thirsty, which accepts everything without comment. The Matrimonial news ad said, "A comfortable home in a prosperous county." It did not mention Tuesdays. It did not mention the soap crock, or the bucket, or the way your shoulders feel at 2 in the afternoon when the wash is finally up and you have 3 hours before you need to start supper. The ad was accurate in the way that a map is accurate, technically correct about the distance, completely silent about the terrain. You look at the line. The shirts are white. Not brilliant white, not the white of the letter paper the scribe used when he wrote your husband's courtship correspondence in that elegant sloping hand. Prairie white, which is its own category, sun-bleached and wind-dried and slightly stiff and completely real, flapping against a sky that goes all the way to the horizon in every direction without asking your permission. You'll bring them in before dark. You'll fold them on the table. Wednesday, your husband will put 1 on and walk out to the pasture and come back with mud on the cuffs. This is not a complaint. It's the schedule. You are walking the field with a burlap sack and a short-handled rake because the stove is empty and there is no wood within a half-day's drive. The Great Plains do not provide trees. They provide dried cattle and buffalo droppings, called chips, which the previous wife collected by the bushel and stacked behind the house in a careful, dense and faintly sour wall 4 feet high. You add to the wall, you learn quickly which chips burn and which crumble, which smoke and which do not, and how to carry a stack of them inside without leaving a trail on the floor. The stove itself has opinions. It runs hot on chips in a way that's difficult to regulate, and it communicates this mostly by burning the bottom of whatever you've set on it. A cast-iron stove on the Great Plains in 1878 is approximately the pickiest appliance in the Western Hemisphere. You learn to adjust the damper the way a surgeon learns to adjust a clamp through failure, mostly, and with an audience of 1 disinterested husband who is already outside. The smell, against expectations, is fine. Chips don't smell the way you feared. They smell like dry earth and old grass, which is almost nothing. Almost. On a cold morning when the stove is first drawing, the kitchen fills with something you can't place exactly, faintly barnyard, faintly sweet, faintly like a decision you can't reverse. You stop noticing after 6 weeks. The neighbors say that too. A woman named Gunhild Brandsen, who came from Wisconsin in 1881 after answering an ad in the Chicago Tribune, kept a running tally on the back of a flour sack. How many chips per meal? How many per full bake day? How many the wall had left? She ran calculations the way accountants run ledgers. In spring, when the cattle drifted and chips were sparse, she switched to dried sunflower stalks and a prayer. The stalks burned fast. The prayer burned faster. This is where the ad's phrasing does its quiet damage. A prosperous homestead with resources and land covers a lot of ground, including the ground you are now raking. Nobody writes, "Fuel is a project" in the matrimonial news. Nobody writes, "Previous wife stacked the chips. You'll take it from there." The ad says comfortable. The stove says negotiate. Of course, you've become expert at fire by now in a way you never anticipated becoming expert at anything. You know what a well-drawn flame looks like, how long a chip pile lasts in February when the wind comes under the door, how to bank a fire at night so morning doesn't start from nothing. It's the kind of knowledge that doesn't fit neatly into a letter home. Your mother in Cincinnati would not know what to do with it. Neither would the woman you were 2 years ago. The wall behind the house grows and shrinks with the seasons. In October, you build it back up before the ground freezes, because frozen chips are ice, not fuel. You stack them tight, the way a mason stacks bricks, because a loose wall falls on a cold morning, and that is a different kind of disaster than no wall at all. By January, the wall is architectural. You have built something. It doesn't look like what you pictured when you packed your trunk in Cleveland, but the stove is warm, the bread rises, the coffee is hot by 5. You are cooking the same supper for the 4th night in a row, because the 4 ingredients available in the larder are cornmeal, salt pork, dried beans, and coffee, and these arrange themselves into approximately one meal. Cornbread in the iron skillet, salt pork sliced thin and rendered in its own grease, beans soaking since morning, cooked all afternoon, coffee brewed in the same pot you used last night and the night before. There are no vegetables. There have been no vegetables since the cabbage in the cellar finished in March, and the cellar has been empty since. The beans take the longest. You put them on before noon and check them the way you'd check a patient periodically, without optimism. By 3 o'clock, they've softened enough that you stop worrying about your teeth. The salt pork goes in with them eventually, because everything in this kitchen eventually goes in with everything else. The cornbread is the fastest part, which is why it's also the part that goes wrong most often. Too dry, too dense. A little scorched on the bottom where the chip fire ran hot for 6 minutes before deciding to barely exist. The skillet has opinions about heat distribution. They are not good opinions. You don't call it scurvy. You call it feeling poorly, or your gums being tender, or that long, dull, and settling tiredness that doesn't lift. A ship's surgeon would recognize it immediately. You're not on a ship. You're in a 2-room soddy in Kansas in February with no citrus fruit within 200 miles. The last fresh anything apples from a neighbour's cellar came in October. That was 4 months ago. Your body is filing a formal complaint and you don't have the vocabulary to understand the complaint or the ingredients to answer it. Dorothea Schreiber arrived from Cincinnati in 1879 to marry a wheat farmer outside Dodge City, keeps a small account book with a column she labels times provisions on hand. The column stays short: cornmeal, salt pork, beans, coffee, lard, occasionally dried apples, a sack of sugar, a tin of condensed milk for the baby. She draws a line under the condensed milk every time she opens a tin, because each tin is a calculation town is 18 miles, the wagon takes most of a day, and her husband goes when he goes, not when the milk runs out. She puts a star next to entries that last more than 2 weeks. The stars are not frequent. Of course, the food situation the advertisement described was somewhat different. A farmer of steady habits owning 160 acres, the ad said nothing about the 160 acres being mostly winter wheat, the winter wheat being mostly a promise, and the promise being mostly dependent on rain that had not materialized in the current calendar year. The word times, comfortable times, appeared in several letters. Comfortable, here, is doing tremendous structural work for a very small word. Pellagra comes from a diet of cornmeal, and not much else. It presents as a rash, then fatigue, then confusion. The cause won't be properly understood for another 60 years. The remedy, when it's recognized, will be meat and leafy greens and beans, none of which you can produce in quantity until the kitchen garden comes in, and the kitchen garden has been frozen since November. The nearest physician is in town. Town is 18 miles for Dorothea. For some women it's 30. For some it's a direction more than a place east, roughly, past the draw, before the creek bed. The coffee is the reliable part. You have coffee in the morning and you have coffee after supper, and sometimes you have coffee when you're not sure what else to do, which is a reasonable description of coffee's entire social function both then and now. The pot never gets fully clean. It develops a character over the winter. You stop noticing the character, which is itself a kind of adaptation. By April, if the kitchen garden comes in, things improve. Onions first, then kale, if the seeds weren't eaten through the winter. The first green thing you eat in spring has a flavor that doesn't have a name. It's not just taste, it's your body recognizing something it's been missing for months and responding with an enthusiasm that feels almost embarrassing. You eat the onion standing up, next to the garden bed, before you've even brought it inside. Nobody sees this. The prairie doesn't comment. You are sitting on a small wooden and slightly wobbly stool at 5 in the morning, with your forehead pressed against the warm flank of the third cow, and the first 10 cows are still waiting in the yard. The advertisement specified 12 cows. You did not entirely believe 12 cows, in the way that one does not believe figures stated in advertisements. The figure was accurate. You finish the third cow, wipe your hands on the apron, move the stool, and the fourth cow shifts her weight from one back leg to the other without urgency, because she has all morning. Let's talk about the advertisement itself. It ran in 1,878 inches, a Kansas City paper, 11 lines long, stating plainly that a rancher of 37 years, sober, Protestant, owning 160 acres and 12 head of dairy cattle, required a wife capable of assisting with the milking and managing a household without hired help. That last clause, without hired help, was doing considerable work. It wasn't describing an absence. It was describing you. Every task between sunrise and dark, every bucket of water hauled from the well, every meal cooked over a dung fire, every calf that needed separating, that was the hired help that wouldn't be coming. The cow in front of you is named Hester. You know this because your husband told you on the second morning, somewhat defensively, as though naming the cows was a habit he wasn't sure he wanted you to know about. There are 12 names. He knows all of them. He introduced you to none of them in advance, which tells you something about the order of things here. Milking 12 cows takes roughly 3 hours if nothing goes wrong. Something goes wrong about twice a week, a kicked bucket, a cow that decides this particular morning she has opinions about the process, a calf that gets loose and causes a general disruption. You've learned to do the arithmetic in your head before you begin. 12 cows, 3 hours, then the fire, then the separating, then the churning, then breakfast, then whatever the afternoon holds, which is also several things. The day has an agenda. The day does not consult you about it. Vera Holst, who came out from Wisconsin to a Kansas homestead in 1881, wrote to her sister that she had not sat down between 6 in the morning and 9 at night in the first month of her marriage. Not once. She wrote this without apparent outrage, which is perhaps the most startling part. She was simply noting the schedule the way you'd note the weather. It is what it is, and it does not care whether you find it remarkable. The butter is where the economics get interesting. You churn 3 times a week and produce more butter than the household consumes. The excess goes to town 25 miles away, where it sells for 15 to 20 cents a pound. Your husband records the income in a ledger. It is the household's most reliable cash. You are in effect running a small dairy concern with your forearms and a wooden paddle, and the enterprise is listed in the ledger under your husband's name, which is how ledgers work out here. The 6th cow is the difficult one. She has been the difficult one since before you arrived. You know this because Hester is calm, Margaret is slow, and the 6th cow, your husband calls her simply the problem, has made her feelings about all of this abundantly clear since day one. The problem leans. She doesn't kick exactly. She just redistributes her weight in your direction with a kind of bovine passive aggression that leaves bruises on your shoulder twice a week. You have begun leaning back preemptively. She has noticed. You've reached an arrangement that neither of you is satisfied with. By 7:30, the yard is quieter. The cows are back in the field. The milk is in the cellar, such as it is a shallow pit dug under the house, covered with boards, cool enough in winter, barely adequate in summer. You wash your hands with the lye soap, which has the texture of a river stone and the personality of a minor punishment. Your palms are red. They've been red since the second week. You've stopped noticing. The advertisement said 12 cows. It was the one thing it got exactly right. You are asking your husband, in the 3rd week of marriage, how far away the nearest woman lives. He pauses with his coffee halfway to his mouth and counts something on his fingers, which suggests that he has not asked this question before. The answer is 7 miles by way of the long, rutted, and reliably empty section road to the Halvorsen homestead. Mrs. Halvorsen is Norwegian, came over in '76, has 4 children, and does not yet speak much English. The next nearest woman is in the town of Junction City, which is 22 miles away on the same road. Your husband doesn't understand why this matters. He has neighbouring farmers he sees at the grain elevator, the feed store, the church when weather permits. He sees a human face roughly twice a week. You have seen, since your wedding day, your husband, his hired hand Emil, and a circuit rider who stopped for water and kept moving. Emil eats in the barn. The circuit rider didn't stay. 7 miles on the Great Plains in February means 2 hours each way in a wagon, assuming the road isn't frozen into ruts that could snap a wheel, assuming the horse isn't needed for something else, assuming your husband agrees the visit is worth the time. 7 miles is not a neighbourly distance. 7 miles is a geographical argument against the concept of neighbours. The physicians who travelled this region in the 1870s and 1880s started calling it prairie madness, which is a clinical term for watching the sky sit on the ground for 360 degrees in every direction and slowly becoming less sure you exist. The symptoms they recorded were depression, weeping without cause, a fixed stare at nothing in particular, episodes of screaming. The treatment was fresh air and mild exercise, which is exactly what you've been doing for 6 months and which is not, in fact, the problem. You write letters. Writing letters is the scaffolding that holds this situation together. You write to your sister in Cincinnati. You write to your mother. You write to your former church. You write to a woman named Dorothea Kessler, who answered the same matrimonial column you did, who ended up in Iowa instead of Kansas, and whose most recent letter arrived with a pressed wildflower inside because, she wrote, she wanted to send something that wasn't words for once. The paper is cheap, and the pen scratches. You write anyway. The letters travel northeast and take 10 days to arrive and 10 days to come back, so any conversation you're having with your sister happened 3 weeks ago in time that no longer exists. March comes. The snow thaws. Your husband says the road to Halvorsen's is passable now. He says it like this is news you've been waiting for, which you have been quietly for 4 months. You borrow the wagon on a Tuesday. You take a loaf of bread because arriving empty-handed is not something your mother raised you to do. You take the road 7 miles through fields that are brown and enormous and perfectly silent except for the wind, which on the Great Plains is never actually absent, just occasionally less insistent. The Halvorsen soddy sits in a low place where the ground dips slightly. There's a garden staked out in optimistic rows. A child is standing in the yard doing nothing visible, watching your wagon approach with the focused suspicion of someone who hasn't seen a stranger in a long time. Mrs. Halvorsen Astrid comes to the door and understands immediately why you are here. She doesn't need English for it. She puts the kettle on. She has a tin of something that might be cookies or might be crackers. In either case, she puts them on the table like they're the good china. You sit together in a room that is darker than any room you have ever sat in, a room where the noon light through the single window is the colour of old linen and barely reaches the back wall. You drink tea. You use your hands for most of the conversation. She says a word that sounds like Yemstead and points at herself, then at the floor, then at the door, and you gather it means something about home and here and the distance between them. You nod. You understand the general territory even if you don't have the word. You stay 3 hours. When you leave, Astrid stands in the yard until the wagon is gone. The child is still there, still watching. You are writing your mother a careful, edited, and considerably shortened letter, which is the 3rd letter you have written her since arriving, and the first one you will actually send. The first 2 letters described the soddy too honestly and were torn up. The 3rd letter describes the soddy in language your mother can read without crying at the supper table. You mention the garden you are planning. You mention the cows. You mention that the cornbread is, in fact, a thing one can learn. You do not mention Wilkins, or the well, or the door that does not latch properly. What you do not mention takes a paragraph of its own. The roof leaked for 3 days after last week's rain, and the mud that came through it was not decorative. There is a smell in the southeast corner that Wilkins says is normal, and that you are increasingly certain is not. The one window faces north, which means even on a clear afternoon the interior light is the colour of an old penny. You have learned to thread a needle by feel. You do not mention this because your mother would not sleep. The letters you receive are also edited. Your sister writes in her last note that Boston is much as always, which could mean anything, and probably means your cousin Margaret finally married the man from Providence, and nobody thought you needed to know immediately. Your mother writes that father's knee is somewhat better, a phrase she has been using since 1867, and that has never once corresponded to a knee that is actually better. Everyone is writing a version. You are writing a version. The letters travel back and forth across 2,000 miles, carrying nothing but the most survivable interpretation of events. The physical act of sending the letter is its own small ordeal. The nearest post office is in town, which is 22 miles, which is Wilkins's trip to make, not yours. You fold the letter. You hand it to Wilkins on a Tuesday. He looks at it the way he looks at most things you hand him, which is with a kind of neutral acknowledgement that suggests he has registered the object without forming an opinion about it. The letter will leave his coat pocket at some point before it reaches town. You hope it leaves voluntarily. A letter from here to your mother in Massachusetts takes somewhere between 10 days and 3 weeks, depending on weather, the Abilene mail rider's schedule, and a third variable that the post office has never satisfactorily explained. Your mother's replies arrive in similar windows. This means that by the time she responds to what you wrote, you have already lived another month. She is answering questions about a life you are no longer having. You are writing about a life she won't receive news of for weeks. The correspondence is less a conversation and more two people shouting at where the other person used to be standing. Mrs. Clara Pruitt, who lives 11 miles east, the third nearest neighbour, a woman of approximately 50 who came out from Ohio in 1871 and has the posture of someone who decided long ago to find everything faintly funny, have told you once that she stopped writing her family honest letters in her first winter and never started again. She said this while handing you a cutting from a geranium she'd kept alive through 2 Dakota winters, which she presented with the seriousness of a woman handing over a classified document. The geranium is currently on the north-facing windowsill, doing its level best in inadequate light. You understand the feeling. So the letters go out. They describe the garden in the present tense, which is optimistic, because the garden is currently a plan and a stick marking where the fence will be. They describe the cows as manageable, which is also optimistic, because one of the cows has developed a personality. They describe the view, which is genuinely true. The sky out here does what it wants, and what it wants is usually spectacular, and this costs nothing to report. Your mother writes back that she is glad you are happy. You did not say you were happy. You said the sky was remarkable. These are not the same thing, but you let it stand. The fourth letter is already forming in your head. You won't write it for another 2 weeks. It will describe the garden again, this time with slightly more confidence, because by then the fence post will be in. You are in bed with what you will later understand was a low fever caused by water from the well in the 3rd month, and your husband is sitting on a chair near the stove holding the small, brown, and conspicuously labelled bottle he bought from the peddler last summer. The bottle is Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound. It is intended for female complaints, by which the label means almost anything that involves a woman and a complaint. The compound is 20% alcohol. He pours it into a tin cup and brings the cup over. You drink it. You sleep. The peddler came through in August on a wagon that smelled like camphor and optimism. He had 14 bottles of the compound, 3 tins of patent tooth powder, and something he called Dr. Hammond's Restorative Nerve Tonic, which was also mostly alcohol, but with a different label and a higher price. Your husband bought 2 bottles of Pinkham's and felt responsible about it. The bottle promised relief from weakness, kidney complaints, bloating, and what the label called a general feeling of female exhaustion. The label had a portrait of Mrs. Lydia Pinkham herself composed, white-haired, confident, looking like a woman who has never been cold or uncertain in her life. You and the bottle have had a complicated relationship since August. Let's talk about what medical care looks like out here. It isn't a doctor. It's a half-day's ride to someone who may or may not have completed a course of lectures at a medical college that existed for 3 years before closing. The nearest physician to your area charges $2 for a visit, which your husband regards as an extraordinary sum, and which requires someone to ride to town first to retrieve him, which means a second day and a second dollar. The economics of frontier illness strongly favour the bottle on the shelf. Meanwhile, the fever runs its course the way fevers do, stubbornly, without schedule. A neighbour woman, Mrs. Holt, rides over on the second day, She's a solid, practical person from Illinois who has apparently survived everything this territory has attempted on her since 1873. She brings a cloth soaked in well water to put on your forehead, which is the same well water that likely produced the fever in the first place. You don't say this. She is being kind. The cloth is cool. You accept it with genuine gratitude and close your eyes and don't think too hard about the epistemology of frontier medicine. Missus. Holt sets a pot of broth on the stove without asking and starts talking to your husband in a low voice near the door. You catch pieces. She says you need rest. She says she had something similar last spring and it passed in a week. She does not say what to do if it doesn't pass. That subject gets handled by a long pause and a change of topic. She stays 2 hours, makes sure you drink something, and rides home before the light goes. The broth is salt, pork and dried beans and something vaguely vegetable that might be turnip. It is not restorative in any particular sense. It is warm and present and both things count for more than they should. Your husband refills the tin cup that evening. You drink it and you don't sleep immediately this time. You just lie in the dark listening to the sod house settle, which it does constantly, like a building quietly reconsidering all of its choices. There's a mouse in the wall. There has been a mouse in the wall since October. At some point it stopped being alarming and started being ambient, like the wind, like the stove ticking as it cools, like the particular silence of a place that is 4 miles from the nearest lamp. The bottle has enough left for 2 more doses. After that there is nothing on the shelf except tooth powder and a tin of lard, and the lard isn't medicine, though at this point you'd consider the argument. By the 5th day the fever breaks, which is what fevers do when they're going to break at all. You sit up. You eat. You feel like a person again rather than a problem requiring management. Missus. Holt sends her eldest boy over with a jar of preserved plums and a note that says she's glad you're better. The boy is 9 and extremely serious about the jar. He holds it with both hands the entire 4 miles. You get up the next morning and go back to work. The well is still the well. You are 7 months along, and your husband and Wilkins have spent the supper hour discussing which neighbour to ride for when the time comes. Mrs. Halvorson, the Norwegian 7 miles east, has delivered her own 4. The doctor in Junction City has delivered 2, both of them poorly. There is no nearer option. The plan, as it forms across the table, is that Wilkins will ride for Mrs. Halvorson as soon as the early signs begin, which means that the first 3 or 4 hours of labour will be spent waiting for someone else to arrive. 7 miles on a good road in good weather takes about 40 minutes on a fast horse. This is not a good road. In late autumn, it is a rutted mud channel that freezes overnight into a long, brittle and unsympathetic ribbon of broken masonry. Wilkins will ride it in the dark, probably, because these things rarely start at noon. The horse knows the general direction. The horse, to its credit, has opinions about the timing. That's the plan's strongest feature. Mrs. Halvorson's name has been mentioned before in the context of the bad winter and the Pedersen child and the thing that happened with the croup. She is not a midwife in any formal sense. She is a woman who has survived 4 deliveries of her own and has the kind of calm that comes from having been through something terrible enough that most other things have stopped registering as emergencies. You have met her twice. Both times, she looked at you the way a person looks at a house they're about to have to repair. The arithmetic is not friendly. A woman in Boston or Philadelphia would call frontier maternal mortality remarkable. A woman in Junction City has simply stopped thinking about it, because thinking about it doesn't change the number. Puerperal fever is the main thing. It arrives 3 to 5 days after delivery, moves quickly, and has no treatment beyond cold compresses and hope. A Viennese doctor wrote a paper about hand-washing a quarter-century ago. Nobody in a 7-mile radius has read it. You don't know this. You know that women sometimes die in childbed. You know 3 of them personally. The soddy has 1 room. There is no separate chamber, no curtained alcove, no arrangement that suggests privacy is architecturally possible. Your husband and Wilkins will wait outside, which in November means they will build a small fire against the north wall and stand next to it, making conversation about things that have nothing to do with what is happening inside. The fire will be insufficient. They will stand there anyway. Mrs. Halvorson arrives with a clean, folded and slightly mended flour sack. Inside the flour sack, 2 clean rags, a small pair of scissors, a length of cord, and something wrapped in oilcloth that she doesn't explain. She sets it on the table with the efficiency of a field surgeon who has been issued substandard equipment and has learned not to comment on it. She asks you 1 question. She takes off her coat. She gets to work. The flour sack is not a medical bag. It is a flour sack. This distinction loses meaning somewhere around hour 2. You are alive, 3 days after the birth, and the baby is alive. And Mrs. Halverson has gone home, and your husband is on his second consecutive night sitting in a chair at the foot of the bed watching for the fever that arrived in the Halverson house in the spring and took 2 women the year before yours. The fever does not always come. When it comes, it is usually on the 3rd or 4th day. You and your husband do not discuss this directly. You discuss it by the way he keeps refilling the basin. The basin is a dented tin thing he bought in Yankton for 30 cents. It sits on the crate beside the bed and takes its work seriously, the way small, modest, and earnest objects sometimes do when promoted past their station. He refills it from the water bucket by the door, which means he is also listening to whether you ask for water, how your voice sounds when you do, and whether you stop asking. He has not slept. You can tell by the way he's sitting, not leaning back, not leaning forward, just present in the way a person is present when they are refusing to leave a room. The fever, as it happens, has a cause that nobody in the room knows. Your husband doesn't know. Mrs. Halvorson doesn't know. The circuit doctor who passes through the county 4 times a year doesn't know. A Hungarian physician named Semmelweis figured it out in 1847 hands. Instruments, contamination, the whole quiet, ordinary and invisible chain, and published his findings, and was ignored so completely that American frontier medicine didn't meaningfully absorb the lesson until well after the 1880s. The hand washing would have cost nothing. Mrs. Halverson's kit was clean. She keeps it clean. This is not policy no one told her to. It's the kind of knowledge that lives in women's hands rather than in books, passed sideways between neighbours rather than down from doctors. Her survival rate, if you could put a number on it, is better than most. She doesn't know that either. She just washes. Nationally, somewhere between 600 and 800 women per 100,000 births die of it. On the frontier, where the nearest physician is 3 days' ride and the nearest hospital is a concept, the number runs higher. Higher is not a number anyone is keeping. The ledger doesn't exist. What exists is the chair at the foot of the bed and the basin, and your husband counting the hours between your last answer and this one. Wilkins refills the basin again. He does it the same way each time, lifts the bucket with both hands, pours slowly so it doesn't splash, sets the bucket back without letting it clang. He has developed a technique. The technique is new. He invented it sometime last night. The baby is in the wooden box he lined with a feed sack, which is currently functioning as a cradle with the structural ambition of a cradle. The baby is asleep. The baby doesn't know about day 3. The baby has no concept of the fever or the chair or the basin or the particular silence your husband is producing, which is a very full silence, dense with attention. The loneliness is shaped like the room. It's not that no one cares Wilkins is right there, running on no sleep and 30-cent basin refills. It's that there's no one else. Mrs. Halverson is 7 miles away and has her own household. The nearest woman you'd call a friend is 22 miles south and doesn't know you've delivered. The letter won't reach her for 2 weeks. By then, this will have resolved one way or another, and the letter will either be about the baby's name or it won't be about anything at all. Day 4 arrives. You are warm, but not that warm. You drink the water. You answer when he speaks. By the afternoon of day 4, you ask him to open the window, and he does, and the light comes in flat and grey and entirely ordinary, and he sits back in the chair, actually back, spine touching wood for the first time in 40 hours. He doesn't say anything. Neither do you. The basin sits full and unused on the crate, doing nothing, meaning everything. You are walking the section road at the end of the 3rd spring, and at the corner where the road bends north there are 4 small, weathered, and slightly tilted markers set inside a low fence that you have not stopped at before. 3 of the markers carry the first names of children. The 4th carries the name of a woman who arrived from Indiana in 1874 and died in 1879. The dates on the children are all within a year of each other. You stand at the fence with your basket on your hip and read each marker twice. The woman from Indiana answered a notice in a church correspondence circular in Indianapolis. The notice described a farmer of steady character holding a quarter section in Nebraska, Protestant, sober, aged 31. The farmer was 38. The quarter section existed. Sobriety had a looser definition on the prairie than it did in Indianapolis. These are the facts as best you know them, gathered in pieces over 2 years of Sunday dinners with neighbours who knew the family. Her name was Dora. You know this because the marker says it. You don't know much else except that she came in April of 1874 on the train from Chicago to Omaha, and then by wagon north through country that was still mostly grass and sky, and that she married a man named Gerhard 4 days after arrival before a justice of the peace who was also the postmaster and was finishing a bowl of something when they knocked. The ceremony took 7 minutes. Gerhard had washed his hands for it. 5 years in that house can be summarized by what came in and what went out. Dora arrived in spring and was pregnant by fall. The first child came in 1875, the second in 1876. She lost the third in 1877, and the fourth survived the birth but not the first winter. The dates on the markers have the flat, administrative quality of a ledger. Born, died. A span of months between the two columns that doesn't dignify discussion. Martha Engel, who farms the section east of here, and who knew Dora slightly, told you once that Dora kept a very clean kitchen. That's what she said. A very clean kitchen. She said it the way you say something when what you actually know is too large and too heavy to carry out through ordinary words, so you put down something small and true and hope it stands for the rest. The fifth child came in late 1878. The fever followed it. Puerperal fever doesn't announce itself, it arrives in small increments, the way a debt does, a warmth that seems like tiredness, a tiredness that seems like recovery, and then a night where the basin is not enough. Gerhard rode 12 miles for the doctor. The doctor was in Kearney for reasons no one recorded. A neighbour woman sat with Dora instead. She died on a Tuesday in March of 1879. The fifth child survived her by 6 days. You have been standing at this fence for longer than you meant to. The basket has gone heavy on your hip, and the afternoon is doing what afternoons do in late spring out here, turning gold and promising something it has no intention of delivering. Gerhard sold the quarter section in 1881 and went to Colorado. This is also the kind of thing you piece together at Sunday dinners, in the gaps between the food and the prayer, where people say names quietly and the table doesn't disagree. Nobody says what happened in Colorado. The markers are plain wood, not painted. The low fence around them is post and wire, set close enough to keep the cattle off but with no particular formality to it, functional, not ceremonial, like most things out here that involve the management of difficult facts. There's a clump of wild indigo growing against the east post that nobody planted. You shift the basket to your other hip. The road bends north toward your own house. You have been here 3 springs now, which feels like either a short time or an extremely long time depending on the hour, and you have not yet built a fence. You are noticing, in the 4th winter, that you have begun talking to the small, square, and patiently humming stove, not to yourself, in front of the stove, to the stove. You ask it whether it would prefer the small chips or the larger. You apologize to it when the damper sticks. You name it twice and then stop, on the grounds that naming it would be the thing you do not want to admit you are now doing. The doctor in the Kansas Medical Journal calls this prairie madness. The journal does not say what to do about it. The nearest neighbor is 7 miles east. You know this because your husband measured it once, out loud, as though the distance were an accomplishment. 7 miles in good weather is an hour and a half by horse. In February, with the ground frozen and the wind coming flat off the plains, 7 miles is theoretical. You have not spoken to another woman since October. October was brief and involved a discussion of lard. The silence is the part nobody describes in the letters. It isn't peaceful. It has texture. It presses against the window the sod house was built with, because one window was what the lumber budget allowed, and it comes through the walls in a low, continuous frequency that you feel in your back teeth more than your ears. The grassland in winter makes no sound you recognize from home. At home there were carts, neighbors, the sound of other people failing to mind their own business. Here there is wind and the stove, as previously established, is starting to have opinions. Doctors who documented this condition, and a number of them did, writing up cases in territorial medical journals with the detachment of men who did not live in sod houses, described the symptoms as melancholia, irritability, unfounded weeping, and in severe cases, a complete withdrawal from speech. That last one is understandable. There is no one to speak to. The withdrawal has a certain logic to it, which the journals also don't mention. A minister named Elias Hooper rode a circuit through 3 counties in western Kansas in 1882, and wrote in his diary that he found women in a state he described as removed, his word. Not absent, not ill, removed. He administered scripture, accepted a cup of coffee, and rode on to the next claim, which was 11 miles north. The coffee, he noted, was very good. He did not write a follow-up entry about the women. Your husband doesn't think anything is wrong. He is tired. He is outside in the cold doing things to the livestock that prevent the livestock from dying, which is the full content of winter. He comes in, eats, sleeps, and goes back out. He is not ignoring you. He is managing a small agricultural operation on soil that is trying very hard to become a disaster. He has the focused vacancy of a man who cannot afford to notice what he is not looking at. You write a letter to your sister in Ohio. The letter takes 4 days to compose, not because you don't have things to say, but because the things you have to say are things you're working out whether to say. You write about the stove. You write that it has been cold. You write that you are well. You do not write about October and the lard conversation being the last adult female exchange you can recall. You fold the letter, and it will reach her in 3 weeks if the roads cooperate, which the roads have a mixed record on. There is a bottle of Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound on the shelf above the dry goods. You received it as part of the supplies your mother-in-law sent from Topeka. It is marketed for female complaints, which is a category capacious enough to contain everything you are currently experiencing. It is 20% alcohol by volume, which the label does not mention, but which your body has figured out. You take a small amount in the evenings, not enough to help. The stove crackles. You have given it the larger chips. Outside, the wind shifts and the sod walls make a sound like the building is clearing its throat. Spring is 12 weeks away, which is not the same as soon. You are receiving, by the same post that brings the heavy, bright and aspirational Sears catalogue and the church newsletter, a letter from your sister-in-law in Reno explaining how a divorce works in Nevada. 6 months of residency. 1 court appearance. A reason on the form, of which several are available. The information arrives unprompted, which is the part that requires the most thought. She has not asked whether you want it. She has decided you should have it. You read the letter twice, fold it twice, and place it inside the Bible at the page where it will not be found by accident. Nevada has been the back door of American marriage since before most people could find it on a map. The 6-month residency requirement is famously lenient. The grounds include cruelty, which is defined loosely, and neglect, which is defined even more loosely, and incompatibility, which is not really defined at all. Let's talk about the men this concerns. Not every husband was a deliberate deceiver. Some were accurate in their letters and simply catastrophic in person. A meaningful distinction, though not a legal one. Some were kind enough in a remote, preoccupied way, the way a fence post is kind. It doesn't lean on you. It just doesn't move either. A miner named Calvert Sims had been married 4 times by 1891. Each wife filed in Nevada. Each filing lists incompatibility. The clerk who processed the 4th paperwork reportedly did not look up. You arrived holding a correspondence that described a partner. You found instead a schedule and a list of tasks, 2 of which involved the cows. Here is what the form asks: your name, your husband's name, the date of the marriage, the grounds. Margaret Tollefson, originally from Wisconsin, filed in 1887. Undergrounds, she wrote. He stated ownership of property he did not possess and has since acquired no property of any kind. The form has a line for additional remarks. She left it blank. The blank is doing a great deal of work. Your sister-in-law Dora is the one who filed first, back in 1884, after her husband turned out to own neither the sawmill nor the horse he had described in correspondence. She took the 6 months in Reno, which she has described to you as not entirely unpleasant. There is a boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Albrecht, who does not ask questions and serves a decent soup. 3 other women waiting out their residency were staying there the same season. They played cards in the evenings. Nobody talked about the reasons. Everyone understood the reasons. The Bible is a practical hiding place. It is the last thing he picks up and the first thing that would embarrass him to search through. You are not planning anything. You want to be clear about that you are not planning anything. You are simply in possession of information. The way a person standing near a door is simply standing near a door. The door may not open. The door may never open, but you know now that it exists, that it has a handle, and that the handle turns. Outside, the wind has picked up from the north. The stove ticks. The Lydia Pinkham's bottle on the shelf catches the last of the afternoon light and holds it, amber and still, radiating nothing in particular. The letter is in the Bible. The Bible is on the shelf. You go back to threading the needle, which the light is finally good enough to manage. You are listening to a woman at the warm, crowded, and faintly damp church social in Junction City, telling the story of how she arrived in Washington Territory in 1866 on the second of the two voyages organized by a man named Asa Mercer. Mercer had promised 500 women. He delivered approximately 100. The New York Herald had called it trafficking before the ship sailed, which was part of why the other 400 had stayed home. The woman telling the story arrived expecting a teaching position, married a sawmill operator in Olympia within 6 weeks of landing, and has not seen Mercer since. Her name is Dorothea Hess, and she is eating a square of cornbread with the focused calm of someone who has survived enough that a church social registers as paradise. She holds the cornbread in both hands. She does not put it down while she talks. What he actually promised was teaching. A teaching position was the standard framing respectable employment in a civilized settlement, a chance to build something in a new place, not bride delivery. The New York Herald was less diplomatic. The Herald ran headlines before the second voyage sailed that were unkind enough to Mercer's character that roughly 400 of the 500 confirmed passengers quietly reconsidered their tickets. The ship left anyway. It carried somewhere between 97 and 100 women depending on the source, which is the kind of numerical ambiguity that suggests nobody was counting very carefully. Dorothea says the voyage took months. Around the tip of South America, through seas that didn't seem to understand the concept of a hull, into the Pacific, north toward Puget Sound. The Transcontinental Railroad won't open for another 3 years. This is the route. You either do this or you cross Panama, where the yellow fever is, or you cross the continent in a wagon, where everything else is. She describes arriving in Olympia as loud, not the welcome, the place. Lumber operations ran nearly around the clock. The smell was sawdust and salt water, and something she describes, charitably, as ambition. She had expected something rougher, she says, and gotten something louder. Of course, Mercer himself did not remain neutral on the subject of the women he transported. He married one of them, Annie Stevens, of the second voyage, became Annie Mercer before the year was out. The sawmill operator Dorothea married was a man named August, and she speaks of him without the careful diplomatic pause that indicates concealed feelings. She says he is steady. She says he built the addition himself last spring. She says he has never once asked her to milk more than 4 cows. She says this last part looking directly at you, because apparently the 12-cow advertisement out of Kansas made it this far west, and apparently the women have all heard about it, and apparently it has become a fixed reference point for female grievance on the frontier, which is fair. You are reading, in a folded, creased, and slightly soft newspaper that has reached the homestead 3 weeks late, a story about a Chinese woman in Idaho named Polly Bemis who is said to have been won by a saloon keeper in a poker game in the mining camp of Warrens. The newspaper repeats the story with the certainty of newspapers. Local historians, the article notes briefly, dispute it. She is named Lalu Nathoy. She was sold by her father in China at 18. She nursed Charlie Bemis through a gunshot wound. She married him in 1894. They are still on the Salmon River. The historian cited in the column leaned toward a different version. She was brought over as a contract labourer, sold into domestic and possibly other service, and Charlie Bemis was a man she knew for years before any marriage entered the picture. You turn the page. The page is yellowed at the edges, the way old paper goes yellow when it has been folded into a saddlebag for a week. What the newspaper doesn't print is the part that needed printing. Lalu Nathoy arrived in Idaho Territory in 1872. She was 18. The mining camp of Warrens had perhaps a few dozen Chinese residents and several hundred men of various origins, who were all, broadly speaking, in the business of extraction gold from rock, money from each other, and labour from anyone they could arrange to have nearby. A Chinese woman in that context was not a curiosity. She was an inventory line. The saloon where Charlie Bemis worked and eventually owned was called, with frontier originality, Bemis's Place. He ran it. She worked in it, or near it, in the way that women in frontier saloon economies worked in or near things without anyone writing down exactly what the arrangement was. Mei Luan, one of 3 Chinese women documented in Warrens in the 1872 census, is listed in the ledger of a mining company store with a single purchase, a spool of white thread. That's the whole entry. The ledger doesn't say more. It rarely did. What the record does confirm, Charlie Bemis was shot in the face in 1890. The wound was serious. Polly nursed him through it with no physician within a day's ride. using what she knew, which was apparently enough. A man named Johnny Cox, who witnessed the shooting and the recovery, later told a reporter that she saved his life. Charlie Bemis himself did not dispute this. He married her in 1894. They moved to a homestead on the Salmon River, which is remote in the way that remote stops being a description and starts being a physical fact. No road, river access only, nearest town, a hard day's travel upstream. She outlived him by almost 20 years. He died in 1922. She stayed on the homestead until 1923, when a flood finally took the cabin. She was carried out by boat by a man from the Forest Service named Johnny, which is either a coincidence or a pattern. She moved to a house in Grangeville, Idaho, where she kept a garden and gave interviews to people who wanted to ask her about the poker game. She never confirmed the poker story. She never quite denied it either. She told her version in pieces, over years, to different people who recorded different things. The saloon, the years of work, the gunshot wound, Charlie, the river. The garden she grew on a homestead so isolated that her nearest neighbour was the current itself. You fold the newspaper. The story it printed is the poker version, clean, dramatic, easy to follow. The real version is a woman who arrived at 18, spent 22 years building something she hadn't planned on, and then stayed on a River Canyon homestead because she wanted to. That version doesn't have a hand of cards in it. It has thread. It has a gunshot wound. It has a garden no one else could see from anywhere. The newspaper has already moved on to the next item. You can tell because it's already 3 weeks old. You are sitting on the floor of the lean-to that your husband added to the soddy in the 5th year, with the heavy, scratched, and reliably locked strongbox open, and the deed to the property in your lap. The deed is the Homestead Act patent, issued in 1862, granting 160 acres to any head of household who proves 5 years of residence. Your husband filed in 1872. The 5 years ended last spring. The patent arrived 3 months ago. Your name does not appear on it. You knew your name would not appear on it. You read it anyway. The Homestead Act has a head of household. The head of household is your husband. You milked 12 cows this morning. The 12 cows don't appear on the patent either. Let's talk about what you actually own. Your clothes. The butter churn, which was your mother's. A small tin of dried lavender that made the journey from Ohio in your trunk and has been mostly smell for 3 years. A Bible with your maiden name still written inside the cover in your father's handwriting, which is the only document in this house that contains your original name. That's the inventory. The deed is your husband's. The cattle are your husband's. The land you broke your back walking across every season since 1872 belongs, legally and completely, to a man who is currently in town and may or may not be coming back before nightfall. A married woman in 1877 exists, under common law, in a condition called coverture. Your legal identity has been absorbed into your husband's. You can't sign a contract. You can't sue. You can't be sued, which sounds like a benefit until you realize it means you also can't own. A few states have passed married women's property acts by now. New York moved in 1848, Kansas in 1868, but enforcement on a remote claim in the middle of nowhere is a theoretical comfort, the way a map is a comfort when you're already lost. Gertrude, the neighbour woman 2 miles east, has a different situation. Her husband died in February of the lung fever that took 3 men in the county that winter. She is now a widow, which is, counterintuitively, a stronger legal position than wife. A widow can hold title. A widow can file. Gertrude filed in March. Her name is on the deed. She told you this when she came to help with the mending, setting down her basket and producing the paper with the flat pride of someone who has just won an argument that nobody else knew was happening. You fold the patent and put it back in the strongbox. The strongbox has a lock. Your husband has the key. The key is, presumably, in town with him. The children are outside. You can hear the older one arguing with the younger one about something involving a stick. The argument has been going on for 20 minutes and has not yet required your intervention, which is its own kind of mercy. You sit another moment with the empty strongbox and think about the butter churn. It was your mother's. It came west with you. Nobody filed a patent on it. Nobody had to. The deed slides back into place. The strongbox lid closes. It makes a small, satisfied sound, like a thing that knows exactly whose side it's on. So there it is, a marriage arranged by mail, a husband identified by a photograph the size of a playing card, 12 cows, 1 soddy, the buffalo chips, the lye soap, and a wedding ceremony shorter than your morning coffee. You answered the advertisement. You wrote the letter, or had one written. You sent the photograph that did you justice, and received one that did rather more. You crossed a continent by ship, by mule, by emigrant-class train, and arrived somewhere that smelled nothing at all like his letters had implied. You stood before a justice of the peace for 4.5 minutes and were administratively married. You made butter. You learned the sky. You hauled water up from 30 feet beneath the prairie and turned it into laundry, into supper, into another day. Tonight, notice the running water, the lamp bright enough to thread a needle at noon, the floor that isn't dirt, the walls that aren't, on balance, alive. Let your shoulders drop. Let the room get quiet. Let the day go. Sleep well.